Welcome everyone to the Engineer Whisperer podcast. I am super excited to be here today because I have Neil with me. Neil, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
And today we're gonna talk about transition, just in general, and not we're gonna skip the director. We're gonna go to the really fun stuff about your life and your transition. So before we start, give us a little bit of background about
Uh,
you.
a little background. So I grew up in the Midwest, Chicago, south side of the city. My wife actually grew up in the actual city, so she reminds me the suburbs are a distinctly different part than Chicago itself. I disagree. Purdue University for undergrad started off in computer science before going on to the business side, an entrepreneurial venture that extended for a couple years past that, before realizing that cold weather is well cold and uncomfortable and heading out west to UCLA, where I had an MBA. Left with the brightest prospects in mind for raising a round of funding and doing an entrepreneurial thing again, only to watch the job market utterly collapse in 2008, leaving no jobs except for me to go join a startup, an open source software company that engineers will probably recognize, SourceForge. They had better days in the early days of the internet than when I joined them, and layoffs were still happening. But I cut my teeth really in Silicon Valley there for almost 2 years doing data and analytics, setting up their infrastructure and pipelines to be able to use cloud services and mine through their wealth of data before heading over to Google. It would have been in 2011, originally being hired to look at their data. What gets people to click on pictures is really the scope of my job. Fast forward 13 years, I'm sure I'll fill in all the blanks as we're going through. Now holding the title of chief strategist, which is more working externally with our largest customers and agencies so that they can refine and improve their digital strategy than it is working on our products. But for all those companies in, I think, 41 countries and nearly every conceivable vertical, it's simply what can they do better with their business to use technology today? So that's in about 2 minutes, everything that I am. No, I left plenty of open questions, but at least that kind of lays the groundwork for what brings me here to you today.
Well, here we change how people think about change. So let's dive in.
All right, lead the
What
way.
what was your most challenging transition in life so far?
Every day. And I say that seriously, and not to undercut the importance of transition, but earlier on in my career, there were large transitions. Everybody has those. And I think socially, we try to buffer them as much as possible. For a lot of people, you go from high school to college, and then you get to college and they help you get that job. And then you kind of work through there. And a lot of transitions come when people find themselves unhappy with their job or unhappy with their career path. And they wake up far too many mornings saying it's time for something to change. Or unfortunately, as the economy and tech and entertainment and finance we see today, people lose their jobs.
Yes.
And then they say, well, now I've been thrown into this moment of transition. In my case, when I left UCLA in 2009 and there were no jobs, that was a very unsettling moment because a lot of people, majority of my class, left without having anything. And I almost went, I received one job offer on the day before graduation. And that was it. Otherwise, I was worried about
Hike.
that. And by the way, I did the worst thing too, which I'll confide. So I got this great job offer from SourceForge, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I thought part of the ritual was you were supposed to counter and ask for more money, which for the poor guidance counselors at UCLA, they were like, "What the hell are you doing?" I was like, "I thought you did this." And they're like, "No, if you only have one
Maybe,
job."
yeah, maybe not during recession either.
Yeah, it's like, no, wait, and probably now they're somewhere in their career docs. They're like, okay, calibrate your expectations by job market. I hope they learned. I certainly did. And so I joined SourceForge, and then 2 weeks later they lay off a third of their staff. And I'm sitting there thinking, and you start going through the oscillations. All right, I just moved here. I don't have a backup job. It took so many months to get this job. And what it led to was really two things. One was a continual focus that we can talk about what I was actually doing in the job to deliver value. And the second part was this really persistent, this stubborn mindset that if you ever become complacent in a role, in a job with a company, if you ever look at your point as being, my career is settled and I'm not transitioning to something bigger or better or doing other things, that complacency can come up and hit you really, really quick.
Well,
And
that's the mindset I want to talk about. So I'm happy
you seen
that
this. You
it
seen
came
this.
out. Yes.
So this is what I was trying desperately to avoid. And just the contrast as to how I approach it is that I can never be, it doesn't reflect certainly on the loyalty I have to companies. I've been at Google for more than a decade, but it's one of those things to say, well, what happens if something changes? And that perpetual worry and concern, which drives you to either meet other people or invest in yourself and learn more, things we'll talk about. But when people ask me, they're like, well, what was the hardest? The hardest transition really was before I learned that. Where it's like nobody tells you about what's going to happen. You look at it simply in the context of, well, I'll find another job, and it's much larger than that. And so now I look at it to challenge myself to say, if I'm not continually making that transition, and it's a self-imposed goal, and it's not challenging, then I'm not moving fast enough. And that puts me at risk for more disruptive things that could happen later on.
So Neil, is it really, you mentioned that it's a little bit worrying, and I have a theory that it's actually the opposite, that that mindset puts me to peace because I think about change differently. As a in your example, being just thrown into a change or wake up one morning and like, okay, you don't have a job, you this and this and this.
That's
With
it.
never thought about the changes because I think about the changes almost like don't scare me anymore. Is that the
Is
case with
that
you?
isn't that a great place to be? Yeah, well,
I
that's the
love
thing.
it.
Change in itself is not scary. Deadlines you don't have control over. The inability to pay bills or rent or school or repairs in your car, those are pressures. And I think people often will confuse the two. Where if you're guiding the transition, you're saying right now, say I went to anyone that's listening to this, you have 12 months to plan the next step of your career. That's a good amount of time. Now, if I say you have 2 weeks, now all of a sudden that becomes daunting. You need to force something through. You're really not transitioning anything. You're just trying to find a job. You're trying to keep everything together. I get that. But the
Yes.
transition side is something that should be going on through your entire career where you have control over it. You're guiding it. You're proactive about it.
Yes.
And then to your point, it becomes a lot less scary because what you're doing is not saying, how do I make sure I pay these bills or keep my insurance? But what can I do with all these opportunities in the world that are in front of me? With everything I can do in this one magnificent life that I have, what am I going to do next? And all of a sudden, the status quo and that stuff becomes really, really boring. You're like, so what are you going to do for the rest of your life? I'm going to sit at this job until I retire. Or I could try other jobs, other roles,
Mm.
other disciplines, other types of companies, small businesses, large businesses. I could build my own business. Those have to be more exciting than just do the same thing, except you need to be in control of it. And that's why I empathize with that point of view you have. If you're continually driving and forcing that change, great. If you're not, then what you're really feeling is that uncomfortableness about instability, insecurity about life. And
Yes.
that's not a transition at all. That's just trying to hold things together. And I understand that one as well.
So when you figured it out at that moment that you mentioned, what did you do? What was the first step that you did to get better at it, to move forward? Because I think that's also what my audience would want to know, because we have these ideas and
Yeah.
these thoughts come to our mind, but it's really our actions that will define tomorrow. So do you remember? You know what?
I remember, and it was not a planned thing. Some people sit there and like, oh, Neil planned this. No, you don't. It happens fortuitously.
Yeah.
I applied and was rejected from Google a number of times before I made it in. And I remember distinctly in my orientation, I was talking to the two people that were seated next to me. And the woman was a corporate litigation attorney with almost 3 decades of experience. And the other gentleman that I was talking to just finished his doctorate at MIT. And then I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, my previous company laid off at this point 2/3 of its staff. We have declining revenues. It made me feel, and I acknowledge this to the people that were close to me, it made me feel at that time like I was an imposter. Like I snuck in because a hiring manager felt bad for me, or maybe made a wrong decision. And I came to learn, by the way, over time, this is very common with a lot of the early day Googlers, that the company had such a reputation for technical innovation, for creativity, for research excellence, that people that made it in felt that they didn't belong and that they needed to work their way up. And so I joked with people, they're like, you just got a job at Google. I said, yeah, they're going to figure this out in a couple months and fire me, but I'll see how many months I can keep that going. And it was actually that imposter syndrome that challenged people, and not only me, but other people I worked with, to say, you almost have like big shoes to fill, that you need to learn more, that you need to grow more. And one of the things that made, and this is what I look for in cultures now, is that because they had a very collaborative culture, you got to meet people that were absolutely at the top of their field. So if you feel like an imposter, in my case, around business people and analysts, you could imagine for someone, and I knew how to write code. And I remember one of the first projects I had was I was writing these API calls to connect into Google Analytics. And I was struggling with it for a day. There was just something going wrong with it that I couldn't do. And so I did a very interesting thing. I wandered over to the Google Analytics engineering section. I didn't know anybody. And I just announced my problem in front of like 20 engineers. And this one guy, Cody, raises his hand, and I never met him before, offers me, he takes a look at my code. And he's like, all right, hold on. Puts on his headphones, which I love, just ignores me altogether. And then promptly rewrites everything that took me a week
You're
within the
like,
span of minutes.
yeah.
And it was more elegant and it worked. And I just looked and I was like, here is someone that's not even a senior engineer, just a basic entry level engineer that has such a mastery over his subject. Like, this is what best in class looks like. It's like, this is where I want to be in my field. And so, what you learn is if you're able to surround yourself by greatness, if you're able to be attuned to say, this is what greatness really looks like in my field, I would hope that that challenges you to become better yourself. It may make you feel a little bit insecure. I'm never going to be an engineer like this. I'm never going to be a business leader like this person. But it allows you to calibrate to say, these are the people I want to learn from. These are the people I want to listen. And that growing takes hold because you're not going there just because somebody said, in school, you need to go to the next level. This is the next courses you take. You don't want to go and advance your career based on when you're going to be promoted. You want to advance your career by saying, these are people that have mastered their skills. And I'm genuinely curious. That's how you know you found your passion, is when you see someone be like, I want to be able to do what they do. I want to be able,
Or
just,
do with them. Do it with
yes,
them, right?
do what they do. And it's not just engineering or your immediate discipline, but whenever you're in an organization, you will see those people that stand out that will do
Yes.
write a memo to be like, this is what I expect of our organization and its values. And I saw another gentleman, Avinash Kaushik. I saw him in 2012. Best public speaker I've ever seen. And that's what pushes you to learn. That's what pushes you to transition to say, I want to be great. I want to learn these skills. Do I know where they're going to take me? Somewhere new. And let's enjoy that journey before somebody forces it on us.
Yeah, so going back to that mindset of thinking about change and
Yeah,
now you're inviting change into your life because you're being inspired by these people. Now, I hope that you became friends with that engineer who sat down and helped you.
I
If
did.
not, you still have a
I
chance
did,
because
and his boss and the other
that's it.
engineers and the product managers. I actually became, this is kind of the thing. When you feel like they're going to fire you anyways, you lose all that concern about what people are going to think about you when you reach out, because the engineers aren't
Mhm.
going to fire me. It's be like, I'm going to make the most of this moment that I have. And as
Yes.
long as the culture supports that, then you're in a great place. And so what I'm really saying as part of this is that this transition, part of it is your own internal motivation, but it also benefits from being around people that can give you a sense of what else is out there to avail you
Yes.
to more opportunities and more skills. And you just have to be attuned to when those come up. And so some people look at those, and these are the people I get along with very well, that look at those to be like, wow, I need to learn how to do this. And I get some questions like that all the time on LinkedIn. I get other people that are like, wow, those people are really good. And that's it. And it's like, wait, but you're not curious. You don't want to learn that. They're like, no, they're just, okay, maybe you're not passionate about it, or they just disconnect altogether, and they create barriers and say, I'm not that person. I can't be that great. Or they'll say, this isn't my field. or this isn't my job.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
that
those are
fixed
defeating.
mindset.
Yeah, those are
Mm-hmm.
defeating in that transition because you're not allowing your career to evolve anywhere. You're just saying, well, this is what my job description says. And you're almost at that point putting your trust in your boss that they will guide you, that you have now effectively outsourced your career development in this transition to somebody else, which could be risky.
Yes. Yeah, I've been there. I've done that and I failed.
I have
So
too.
it's an experience. So go back to your experience. So what you did is you reached out for help and you found friends and you tapped into the power of connection, collaboration, partnership, allyship, inspiration. It's the I'm not alone. I'm gonna do this. This meaning my career path, gonna continue it. And I realized that doing it with others, together with others, is so much more fun
Oh, yeah.
than doing it alone.
It's
Hmm.
so much more fun and it's great. Here's a test that I ask a lot of people is that oftentimes when I know people have lost their job, I always want to help them out. But I get a lot of people who will proactively reach out that I've never talked to before and say, do you have 15 or 30 minutes for a coffee chat? Which is like virtual. I also don't drink coffee, so it's kind of odd. But all right, I'll sit with you 30 minutes on VC and we'll drink water together or nothing at all. And I'll often ask them, I'll say, for the jobs that they were at, and some were at companies for 15, 20 years, I'd say, how many of these chats did you have with other people? You had 2 decades at that company. How many times did you sit down and say, I want to talk to you about a career? And the answer, not surprisingly, maybe, is almost none.
Yep.
Everybody's so focused on the day-to-day work that their meetings were primarily with their peers who were going to drive their projects. There were no conversations about larger careers and guidance. And I'm not talking about going to an executive and saying, can you be my mentor? That's even too formal for me. But how often did you reach out to other people who had different disciplines and different stories? You're sitting here, people are arguably listening to us. But when you were in that role, did you do it? And I often see that look of despair. And I don't mean for people to feel bad, but I like to draw that contrast. So if you're in that role today, when was the last time you reached out to somebody new to learn from them about their career, not about their field or how it helps your project, but how it helps you as a person to build that network so that when that moment of transition comes, if it is unanticipated, that you already have that experience and that network in place to draw on and to look for that guidance.
Yes. I would add one more thing because I highly leveraged this when I was in the corporate world, to the extent that I was invited to an underground change movement that I had no idea even existed, but it was fun. Is the other side is, think about yourself as an interesting person. And now I'm really talking to engineers and analytical minds who are like, well, I'm not really an interesting person to reach out and I don't have anything to say. And I love how maybe you had that thought too. There are many engineers who have this thought, and this is a common conversation with them. And I'm not trying to convince you who is listening right now that you are interesting. It's not about convincing. It's about finding something that you've done, the many interests that you have that you haven't told to the people around you that you work with. Share one of them. Share one thing that you tinker with. Something you took apart, something that you follow that you are curious about. You know so much. In your spare time, you put so much effort and passion into. uh, I'm sure somebody around you wants to hear that. So start with you, the person in the mirror. You are interesting, and approach people with that mindset, with that attitude, and see what happens. Give yourself a chance.
I love that advice. And I'll confide in people because I work with a lot of salespeople. And you get in these sales meetings and everyone's sharing stories and they're very boisterous. And I work with some engineers who are like, I'm not like that. This is not my group. And I'll tell you two things. One is I'll say engineers tend to have some of the best stories out there. What they do and the work that they do is not
Second
what
that.
us salespeople see.
Yes.
The salespeople are just better about bullshitting about their own stories. Like that's all it is. It's not that they're better at it. It's just they just as part of their role, they have to force this conversation with other people to survive. That is the skill of a salesperson. But it doesn't mean that they have anything more or less interesting to say. In fact, one of the best engineers I ever worked with, he had a computer science degree, I think a master's from Penn, as well as a degree in finance. And it was interesting because he came to a meeting one time where, and this is a very senior engineer, very well respected, and built some of the foundational technology that we have at Google. And he came to a meeting of mine, and I was a bit surprised. And when I saw him there, we knew each other and we were acquaintances. I was like, it's kind of strange you're showing up. I was like, but if you are, I just want to listen to you. Like, you built some of our foundational ad tech. Can we just listen to you for an hour instead of listening to me? He's like, no, no, no. He's not. I'm not here to speak. I'm like, well, why are you here? And he's like, because I want to know how all of you speak. And it was interesting because I was watching his processes. A lot of people will say, all right, in order to get my story out there and to interact with these people, I need to force myself to do it, which is uncomfortable, right? I'm an introvert. I hate doing it. Like, my wife is the other way. It's like, we'll go to a party. I don't want to meet people at random. That's just not my style. I like to listen to people first. I like to see what they volunteer. I like to watch the conversation happen. And if there's an opportunity, I insert myself. And that was the same thing that he was doing,
I
was
just
instead of going
yes,
into a room and saying, I
yes.
want to be interesting, everybody look at me, which forces him way too far out of comfort zone. And he didn't feel he could sustain that for an hour. He said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sit in these meetings as often as I can, and I'm going to see how other people do it. And then when I feel comfortable, I'll have something to contribute, and then I can fall back when I don't. And that allowed him to build that confidence. But simply the exposure in saying, why don't you show up to these meetings or these organizations where you have nothing to add and you're not expected to? And then I think as you watch it unfold, you will find more opportunities than you can plug into than you thought. You will start to see the patterns, you will start to see the rituals, and then you will know how to communicate with those groups of people. And organizationally, and for the sense of careers, that makes you now one of the most powerful people in your group. Because while everybody else is stepping back and saying, these aren't my people, I don't know how to communicate, you're investing in yourself to say,
Yes.
I want to communicate with these people in this very different,
Yes.
let's call it language, right?
Yes.
I mean that's what it is. Salespeople use their own language, which it involves sales terminology as much as it may involve, I don't know, beer and country clubs. It's very bizarre, but Wall Street people use their own language where I'm uncomfortable. They start talking about M&A activity, and I'm sitting there being like, I have no idea what the hell you guys are saying, but I'll listen and I'll adopt those terms. And the same thing with engineers. I talk to engineers. Shit, I don't know half of the infrastructure stuff y'all build, but I want to learn just enough so that I can respect it and I can have a conversation.
That's
That's it.
exactly how you learn a language. I speak four languages. So at the beginning, when
Wow.
I was sitting in to learn English, I did not speak for a month because I everything was just a big sentence when somebody said something. A native especially is like, okay, but I'll learn this. I know, and I kept showing up every Friday, and here I am now. So
That's fantastic.
yes, that is exactly how you learn a language. So that's a great I love it. Great analogy. If you want to learn a different language, engineering, sales, marketing, finance, have to bring in the listening skills, have to up your listening skills first before you're gonna speak. So
Here's
again,
here's
that
even a here's even a practical exercise I'll give you. You're talking about that language immersion, right?
Mhm.
One of the best things I ever did, when this was back before COVID. I haven't done this as much because now we're more of a hybrid environment, but I insisted that my team never sit at their desk more than 2 or 3 days a week. I wanted them to sit with other teams and just immerse themselves in those. It's almost like go to a different country and surround yourself in that culture of that language and see what
Mhm.
you pick up. Because I have yet to find any organization, any group, anywhere. It
Yeah.
may be finance, it may be engineering, it may be ops. I do not speak their language, but they're all human. And they all find different ways to welcome you. Be like, hey, random guy sitting at this desk, who are you? I mean, you're not bothering anyone. At Google, they have plenty of empty desks. You sit down, and even if they say nothing to you for the first week or 2 weeks,
It,
maybe
you're
they'll invite you to
listening.
lunch.
You're
Yeah,
listening.
you're
You're
listening to their language.
listening. It's key. You remind me of one of my stories, one of my best stories when I was working in finance, and I wanted to bring in a different language. We were working with HR. We had a project, and that was the bottleneck. That HR was saying we don't understand the finance, and the finance people like we don't understand the HR language. We don't speak the same language. And I had this belief that no, you do. So I brought two kind of sample teams together, and I did that. Like, okay, let's just hear each other. And at the end of the meeting, both teams like, wait, we do speak the same language. We like when you say apple, you say, apple, but it's like, wait, when you say that we have the exact same word over here, and it means this. It was eye-opening. Both teams was like, wow, we're so much more closer than we thought we
That's
are. It changed the whole relationship, all our projects.
that's
Language. I'm
that,
fascinated.
that's what does it. And what you come to realize is that in this mode of growth and transition, a lot of the struggles that people find are self-imposed. They worry that they're going to reach out to people for advice and they're going to look silly or strange, or that
Yeah,
they
they're
won't
gonna
have
be
good input.
judged. What
Yeah.
you said.
Or they don't want to go into a meeting because they don't have anything to contribute, or they're worried about sharing their story. And I guess if you take away as an audience nothing else from this, it's that everyone has those same doubts, those same concerns, those same challenges, as much as they do, as you pointed out, the same language. They're just expressing them all in a different way. And part of what you're learning is how they express it so you can relate to those people as much as when you work with different cultures, right? When I work with the Japanese audience, they will be incredibly kind, incredibly respectful, incredibly quiet. I'll work with Dutch audiences, are also my favorite. They'll argue with me over everything. That's just culturally, that's how they do it. And it allows me to calibrate how I respond to them and how I prepare content so that we can find that middle ground a lot closer. Otherwise, you could go in front of, some of these Japanese audiences. You could say they're not responding like American audiences. And so they didn't like my content. No, they just express themselves in different ways, as all cultures do. And it's only by getting in front of them that you realize that. And
Yes.
so when we're looking at this transition to try to keep you onto that larger theme, is that a lot of transition is just continuing to learn and develop yourself, not giving up on that, not becoming complacent. And one of the best ways I found to do that is just through other people, by learning their stories, by letting them learn yours. And so by that point, they can share with you their expertise in going through the transitions, how their career developed. And you go from having a sample size of one, yourself, or maybe your immediate family or your team, to now having hundreds, if not thousands, of people sharing their unique experiences.
So
So that
Neil, tell
when,
me more. How do you
yes,
open someone up? How, when you say their stories, how do you get them to share their stories with you?
I do two things. One is I just like to ask them a lot of questions, not necessarily about their career, but just how they work, how they think through problems. Sometimes when asking people directly, well, tell me your career journey, it's interesting, but then I have to fit my career into theirs and it falls apart quickly. Well, in my case, when I give the introduction, well, I haven't worked for a startup. I didn't go to LA. I'm not in Silicon Valley. And then that story falls apart. We no longer see ourselves in that story.
Yes.
But on the other hand, I like to ask these questions, be like, well, how do you think about your future career? How do you think about what matters and what you focus on? And what I find more times than not is that these are real problems that nobody's solved. We all struggle with work life balance. That's why there's a million books on the subject. We all struggle with what am I going to do next in my career? Am I going to get that promotion? Am I going to leave? Do I really feel safe and secure in my job? And so I like to give some questions that kind of lead into what I'm interested in. I'm interested in how other people think, about how they make decisions, about how they look at their careers. And so instead of asking them how they got to where they are, I don't want to follow that path, as easy and as templated as it might be. I want to know where they're headed next. And I want to know how they're evaluating that decision. And that will help me scale it back. And oftentimes, you can go into it, it's not uncommon for somebody to ask, well, how are you thinking about these same things?
Yes.
And it's okay because I'll tell them I don't have the answers to it. And so the first thing I just try to do is I try to give them room where I can understand their thinking and I'll piece that together. Career path's a lot less interesting. Second part is I don't bring in any expectations. Not that these people will be my mentor or that they'll give me something or that they'll help me with something. In fact, it goes the opposite. I'm just grateful for their time. Time is the most valuable resource we have. And here I have 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes with them where they're going to share a little bit about what they think. And that is invaluable to me. And so I really go in there not with what they can do with me after that. The conversation is what I want, but I'll always ask people afterwards how I can help them. Now, for more senior executives, people in different functions, they don't have an immediate answer to that. But that's the type of relationship I'm trying to nurture. It's not just taking, I need this advice from them, but to say, one of my goals in life is to be useful to people. And so that's really what I want to know. If you're going to give me this time, is there anything I can do for you? Is there any way I can help you? And I mean that. I mean that whether it's today, whether it's a year from now, 10 years from now, because I want that relationship. I just don't want to simply come to you with advice and with that offer to say, I hope we get to talk again. That's kind of the win for me. If anybody wants to talk to me a second time, I'm like, great, I didn't bore you. You don't think I'm an asshole. This is great. I can seriously win. And if there's anything I can do, I genuinely want to help you because you gave up part of your life and allowed me to share in your experience without having to learn it myself. If you save me 20 hours of thinking by giving me an answer to say, maybe you want to focus on this, shit, well, I owe you at least 20 hours of my life to do anything that helps make your life better.
Neil, I love this so much because we came full circle from that engineer who stood up, put the headphones on, and then did the work in 2 minutes to help you out. You had this experience and you're paying it forward ever since. It just hit me. The He gave you the 2 minutes of his time, and he gave you so much more. He gave you his friendship, he gave you
Yeah.
understanding, the mindset, the attention, the focus, I mean, inspiration. It gave you the opportunity for you to change your mindset, and through that to change your life. That's what I'm hearing. And now
Yeah.
you're paying it forward, where I can give someone 2 minutes of my time, and maybe I will be. And I don't know if this is conscious for you or not, but I just realized that it's like that's what you're doing. You're paying it forward. If you can give
That's
your time to someone and really change their life, like that engineer Randy changed your life.
that's all it is. That's all it is it's helping people. And I'll point this out to a lot of the engineers, and this had to be pointed out to me until I figured it out. Again, listening to people, and they told me. It says, when I was just wrestling, and we always, like I said, we wrestle perpetually these transitions, what to do next. And someone pointed out, and he was a bit of a cynical guy, but I knew his heart was in the right place. He's like, do you know how lucky you are? And I'm like, yeah, 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 I know. He's like, no, no. He's like, consider this for a moment. He's like, your education alone puts you in the top 1% just with having a bachelor's degree. So you get a master's, you're in the top 1/10 of 1%. And he's like, so imagine how much accumulated knowledge you have that more than 99% of the world doesn't have. And it was even more critical with the challenge. He's like, how selfish are you that you're not going to share any of it?
Yes.
This actually, you got this obnoxious book behind me. I'm not plugging the book, but I will tell you about the process behind it. When I wrote it from the perspective that I wanted to write something that elevates my status, that impresses people, that people look at and like, wow, he's smart. Absolutely miserable project, right? Because I tried to think about what other people want. When I just looked at it
Yes.
and say, I want to write something that's helpful to people. And I'm going to write something for my kids. If they pick it up, they'll learn a little bit. And it's some university students that pick it up. If they learn something from it, then that's good. I want to be honest. I want to be helpful. And that's a good way to go through a lot of projects. If you're going through a presentation, even and saying, I want to impress these people, then that's a completely different mentality to say, I just want to go in and help these people. I want to go and help. I want to make their time useful. I want to make their time valuable. That's about respecting an audience. And this is actually, I'll tell you, one engineer at Google, I love this guy, told me, because I do a lot of university lectures. This is one of the ways I like to pay it forward. So let's go back and let's lecture to schools. And I just kind of asked him in this conversation we had, and he reached out very much on these same terms that we're talking about. He just reached out to get to know me and to see if he could be helpful when my book was coming out. And I was like, do you ever do college lectures? Because I was like, this guy's a great speaker. I'm sure Harvard would love to have more. And he's like, yes, I do. And I was like, where do you go? And he starts giving me a list of schools I never heard of before.
Oh.
And these were like, and I looked some of them up, and these were community colleges and regional schools. And I said, that's kind of interesting. And I was like, why do you go there? And he's like, it was similar to me. He's like, well, because I try to be helpful. I was like, interesting. But I was like, how does that factor to your school selection? He's like, Harvard, Wharton. He's like, in so many words, like, these are all ego plays. It's like, those students are fine. They'll have every company in the world coming to them. He's like, I like to go to the schools where they will never see anybody from Google until I show up. That's how I maximize my helpfulness. And he couldn't be more right. And it was just that perspective that he shared with me that
Yeah.
changed the way that I accept events. Is now I want to go out and do the things where I can reach people that otherwise would never hear from me, would never attract the attention of tech. Those are the people that need the most support and need the most love. And so maybe if you're thinking out there, I don't know who to connect with, go back to how much you actually know and how many students are out there. That LinkedIn post that I have, people can look it up on career transitions. I had a gentleman reach out to me from Afghanistan that's struggling with the career prospects he has there. It's like, what can you do to help me? And I've been thinking about it ever since. I say, well, how can I help this person? He needs more help than someone here in California. But sometimes maybe if you don't feel that you have those opportunities at your job or what you're doing next, look back at the next generation or the generation before them of students that are coming up that could use some of your experience and your wisdom. And then that starts that virtuous process where they're going to be better off for getting to know you, and you're going to be better off because you get to know them.
That is why I'm doing this podcast. So, and I
There we
didn't
go.
even tell you to plug that in, so great reading mind. Well, we are close to our end. And what I like to do is give the mic to my guests to close us out. So I'll give you a few seconds to think about, but what would you like to leave us with today? I know we talked about
Yeah.
transitions in your journey and quite a few things. But what's something that you wanna that we
I'll
haven't talked yet?
no, I think here would be the way that I would. This wasn't pre-planned, everyone. So you're going to get the thoughts off the top of my head. I always hate, by the way, those podcasts where they try to ask me questions and it's like, let's pretend it's spontaneous, and then you're like, oh, that's a great question. Then you pull up your notes. No, this is right. This is right from the heart, and from the head is for what we're talking about. Is that for everyone when you come to those moments in your career where you're struggling about the next step of your career, a transition that's been forced on you, difficulties in getting recognized and getting promoted and people seeing your genius or you being effective in the office, wondering if you're headed down the right path or if you made decisions or if you should have gone to another field. Just remember that nearly everybody I've met has had those same struggles. We don't talk about it. And so we think that nobody else has had them except for us. There's not enough people talking about those issues. And I don't think we can change this. I think culturally, to change everyone's point of view would be very difficult. But in being mindful of it and being able to connect with other people, you will learn more about their challenges and ways they've approached it. And you'll enrich your life and they'll enrich theirs by learning. And the best way that I always do it is always say by reaching out to people outside of our immediate group. We tend to know how our friends think and our family think because we ask them all the time. Even our coworkers, the people we spend 50, 60, 70 hours a week sometimes with, we
Yep.
know their feelings because those conversations come up and we become very comfortable with them. But if you know how everybody in your immediate group is thinking, then that's where I start encouraging you to say you need to reach out further from them. Find that empty seat in the office and meet with those people. Go into meetings that you probably shouldn't feel comfortable being in and just listen and do those things in those moments where you feel like I shouldn't be doing this. For the most part, that's because you feel that discomfort that everybody feels in those situations. Nobody likes to be embarrassed. Nobody likes to be challenged. And that's what makes the learning from them so much more valuable. And so this is just a reminder to do something you probably already know you should do more of. And so just keep at that and being yourself.
Well, on that note, thank you for being here. Thank you for
My
saying
pleasure.
yes to sitting down with me. I really appreciated this conversation and your time. And let's do it again some point.
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you again for having me. Have a wonderful day too.
Thank you, Neil.
Take care.